Faith, Defend the Faith. My name is William Hemsworth, and thank you for joining me for this week's episode. My guest at this time, popular author, speaker, host of Hands-On Apologetics, Monday through Friday on Virgin Most Powerful Radio, Gary Michuta. Gary, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, William?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks again for coming on the program. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's nice to be, switch seats for a change. You've been on my show a few times, and it's been a lot of fun. So hopefully I'll be as good of a guest as a host, although I'm not really sure I'm that great of a host to begin with. So the bar is pretty low. The bar is pretty low.
We'll talk about your book today, Hostile Witnesses. I started reading it, and I'm just really fascinated because as apologists and evangelists, we oftentimes, we talk about the church fathers, say, look, this is what they prove. We don't often go to those enemies of the faith. So this book is really fascinating to me. And I know it came out a couple of years ago. It's released by Catholic Answers Press. If everyone wants to check it out, please check it out. But what was the process like of researching this book and writing it, developing it?
Well, it's over the years, I would run across these little tidbits where an enemy of the church would kind of give a left-handed compliment, so I'd file it away. And then eventually the pile got so big, I thought, it'd be really cool to kind of put it in order. That's how I do my books usually. It's just a filing system for the stuff that I've learned. And so I started putting in order, and I thought, this is really interesting because everybody's used to the positive evidence, the Gospels, the New Testament. You could go to maybe positive statements from Josephus, a Jewish historian, or some pagan historians that would affirm something about the Christian faith. And those are especially today, it's met with a lot of criticism, from non-believers who try to, poke holes in it. And what happens is, our view of the evidence starts shrinking, right? Because it's like, okay, we accept Josephus, but only this much of Josephus, and this might be true and this not. And I thought, the enemies of the church actually admit a lot of things about Christianity that are now contested. And so I thought, wouldn't it be cool to make a group of hostile witnesses that can affirm things that are denied today? And what really surprised me, all my books surprised me to some extent, but this book especially, was once I put all the evidence together, what I realized was throughout history, the same kind of things were witnessed by these enemies of the church. And this is hardcore fact because it's kind of like, I always use the analogy of if you're driving on a highway and you notice all the people in your lane are moving to the left up ahead. Mm-hmm. It's there's a reason for it. Right. And so these hostile witnesses are all reacting to the same kind of stuff throughout Christian history. And eventually what happens is you kind of get a negative picture of the church. It's kind of like, there's a positive and a negative picture with photography. It's when I put it all together, it's like, wow, this is like the Shroud of Turin. It's a negative picture because all these enemies of the church are kind of reacting to the same thing that the positive evidence is asserting, the enemies will react against Christian miracles and they'll try to explain them away. You look at the positive evidence and it explains, no, these miracles are from God and they confirm the gospel message. And so, when you put those two together, I think it's really a very solid case for the truth of Christianity and the Catholic Church.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the book is you start from Scripture itself, some of the enemies we find within Scripture.
Yeah.
And then you go all the way to modern times, up to, about 100 years ago or so.
Hitler, right? Yeah.
Hitler. I mean,
Hitler.
there's so much.
Yeah,
and of course we can spend days and days on this, but a couple of ones I found within Scripture that were fascinating. One of them we know very well because we profess it in the creed every week is Pontius Pilate. How is he a hostile witness?
Yeah, that was something suggested by my editor, Todd. And, because we were trying to think of some way to explain the concept of the book early on. And he actually noted, he said, Pontius Pilate unwittingly kind of affirms Christ as king, even though he had no intention of doing it, right? because of course during the crucifixion, Pilate ordered that there be a sign affixed over the cross in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek, so everybody could read it, saying that this is the King of the Jews. And of course, he didn't believe that Jesus was the King of the Jews, uh, but nevertheless, his desire to dispel Christianity and actually kind of poke the eye of the Pharisees and the other groups, because they insisted it should say he said he was the King of the Jews. Uh, he unwittingly proclaims to the world in three languages the truth about Jesus. So it's kind of like a hostile witness in that, you have this unwitting proclamation of the gospel from an enemy of the church in a way they maybe not even anticipated.
Right. Another one within scripture that you talk about is I'm gonna butcher his name maybe, Gamaliel
Yeah,
or
Gamaliel. Yep.
Gamaliel. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I mean what's interesting, of course, in the book of Acts, he's like, if this is of God, you can't really fight against it, and
Yeah.
if it isn't of God, it'll die out. And I found that fascinating. How, I guess, in what way is that of a hostile witness?
Yeah. Well, he affirms a whole bunch of things. This is in Acts 5, verse 34 through 39, for those who want to look it up. The Sanhedrin's called. Gamaliel's the head of the Sanhedrin, and he orders that Peter and John be put out. And he says, fellow Israelites, be careful about what you're about to do to these men. And then he kind of gives them a little history lesson. Okay, he says, some time ago, Thaddeus appeared claiming to be someone important. And about 400 men joined him, but they were killed, and all those who were loyal to him were disbanded and came to nothing. After him came Judas the Galilean at the time of the census. And he drew people after him, and he too perished, and all those who were loyal to him scattered. Uh, Now I tell you, have nothing to do with these men. Let them go. For if this endeavor or this activity is of human origin, it'll destroy itself. But if it comes from God, you'll not be able to destroy them. In fact, you might even find yourselves fighting against God. And that's a really interesting admission. First, he appeals to something that I also treat in the book. Some people will deny that there was an expectation the Messiah was going to appear in the first century. Well, Gamaliel and all the other historians like Josephus and even pagan historians, they all admit that within Judea there was this expectation of a coming Messiah. And so he points to a few false ones like Thaddeus and Judas the Galilean, right? And he says, look at the pattern here. They claim to be somebody important, perhaps a Messiah figure. A bunch of people join him. He gets killed. Everybody disperses, right? Now, when it comes to Jesus, now Jesus is crucified at this point. He rose from the dead. Of course, Gamaliel doesn't believe that. But he says, look, the leader's dead, so the followers are going to disappear if the pattern follows, right?
Right.
But, you also have this other danger too, that if you fight against these people and it turns out he was the Messiah, you would actually end up fighting against God. So he wisely counsels them just to let them go and just see what God will do. And like William, what you're alluding to, you look at the history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is Christianity, the followers don't disperse. They continue on throughout history, willing to be martyred. And
Right.
you could see, and in my book, I show you like this curious reaction from Jews and pagans as to why are these Christians following a dead leader? It doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
And so in a way, it kind of is, you could see where the resurrection's implied, right? Because our leader isn't dead, he's alive. And that's the only way you can account for this miracle of Christianity persisting through over 2 millennia of existence with a leader that supposedly was killed. I just found that as a really fascinating chain of testimony.
Well, I agree 100%. And what's interesting is you talk about this whole chain through 2,000 years, how these people have been willing to die over someone who is dead, and even some people say never existed, which kind of gets me to my next question. There's people out there who say, outside of the Bible, there's no evidence that Jesus even existed. Well, a lot of your sources in the book squash that theory right away.
Yeah, right.
um, and the sources are out there; even anyone could find them. One of those is Tacitus, which I find
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
He discusses Jesus quite a bit, the followers. What are some things that Tacitus says, and maybe when he lived, when he wrote?
Yeah, well, Tacitus is probably considered one of the greatest ancient Roman historians. He lived between 56 and 117 AD, and we have some of his works still available in fragment form. And he actually mentions Christianity kind of not directly, but indirectly in his book called The Annals, 1544, if you want to look it up. And he's basically explaining, well, how the Emperor Nero began to persecute this group called Christians. So he has to explain to his pagan audience, what's this group, these Christians
Mhm.
about? And he says, Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition was checked for a moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. And then he goes on to describe about how the Christians were persecuted. So yeah, you're right. Those who doubt the existence of Jesus, those who lived right after him, they believed he was a historical person. In fact, like you said, Tacitus actually gives us, historical markers. He was
Right.
a historical person suffered, a historical person was executed under the reign of Tiberius, a real historical person under Pontius Pilate. Again, that's in our creed. So, and he doesn't love Christians. This isn't a Christian gloss kind of imported into Tacitus, because no Christian would ever style themselves as superstition or a source of evil or something like that. This is definitely a hostile witness, but he identifies him as a historical person, and he has that curious thing at the end that I read, where his phyllis or this superstition was checked for a moment, and then it broke out again in Judea. And in the context there, he's talking about Jesus being executed. So you kind of have that same thought as Gamaliel, right?
Right.
Yeah, these leaders are executed and then the followers are dispersed. And so this movement being checked, namely Jesus was executed, unexplainably breaks out again, right? And although it's not direct evidence of the resurrection, it does show that the pagans realized there was something odd going on here, that, this should not be happening, that these followers are still following what he calls Christus, this leader from whom they get their name.
Right. I've always find that fascinating. People
Yeah.
say, there's no evidence outside of the Bible. Then you can Tacitus. Then you mentioned Pliny the Younger, and I always find interesting as well as I was reading your book, Gary, is you go into detail about the Quran,
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
and a lot of people I know, they want to talk about the Quran, how well, pretty much in a bad way, but like you point out, there's some things in there that point to truths of Christianity. Give us like an overview of maybe what those some of those points are.
Yeah, that's I found that kind of fascinating myself, because now remember, Islam, earliest Christians understood Islam as a Christian heresy, kind of a schismatic heretical sect that came out of Arabia. And, it's interesting that Islam also seems to have picked up and continued to hold certain Christian beliefs, but in a slightly mangled form. And so, for example, the Quran affirms the virgin birth. Uh, it affirms that Jesus performed miracles. Actually, it's kind of interesting because Muhammad never performed a miracle.
Right.
The only miracles he supposedly did was the Quran, but not so with Jesus, according to the Quran. Jesus ascends into heaven. and that he'll come back in judgment. Again, this is something you don't ascribe to Muhammad, but Jesus is going to come back in judgment. Uh, it also the Quran also has some interesting things that kind of sort of point to the sinlessness of Jesus and Mary, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because that's usually
It is.
something of a Catholic idea, right?
Right.
And it's especially weird because Islam doesn't have an understanding of the original sin. So, it's not talking about the Immaculate Conception per se because they don't believe there's anything to be immaculately conceived from, right? But it does make some really startling remarks about Jesus and Mary. They combine them both. They both say they're faultless. They they speak about both of them in terms of like sanctity or holiness, that they're equal. And like I said, that kind of parallels the Catholic beliefs, that Mary is immaculate conceived and remains sinless throughout her life.
And what I found interesting about Muhammad as well, like you stated, he says that Jesus performed miracles. He talks about the sinlessness. He himself never did any of these miracles. And I also found interesting that somehow he points to like this great apostasy after Jesus came.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I
right.
found that I found that interesting as well. And of course, you can go back and prove that's not true and all that. Just like I guess to me, it kind of parallels the great apostasy from the LDS faith
Yeah, right.
in a way. Of course,
Yeah,
you can go back and prove that didn't really happen, but
yeah. Well, are you familiar with Rod Bennett? You should have him on your show. I don't know if he does Skype, but he wrote the book, the Apostasy That Wasn't, I think it was. He also wrote Four Witnesses and a few other books. He's a
I've
convert.
I've heard about the book. I haven't read it yet. It's actually in my Kindle reading list. It is in
Okay.
there. I
Yeah,
haven't got
I
to
have
it,
a.
but I do
Yeah,
have to.
sounds like me.
Yeah, I have so many in there. My wife makes fun of me. She's like, "You're gonna buy another book. You haven't read the one you finished that
Yeah.
you're reading now." So,
Well, now you're host, right? So now you can invite the authors on. You don't have to read it. You can just ask them about it. But I had him on my show a couple of times, and Rod says, every group has to have a kind of apostasy theory, not just cults like Mormons or Jehovah Witnesses or Islam, but even Protestants. Their apostasy they claim happened around the third, fourth century, usually with Constantine
right.
or Constantine, legalizing Christianity. Uh, so everybody, if you want to claim to be, the spiritual, what do I want to say, heirs of Judaism, you got to explain why Christianity became corrupted. And you're right. The Quran basically says that the Gospels, the monks, the Christians had distorted the Gospels. It was an invention of monasticism, and um, and that's another thing that goes throughout history is, it's kind of like Jesus was one of us, but the Christians distorted who Christ really was. So Islam believes that Jesus was a Islamic prophet, right? He was a good Muslim, but the Gospels distorted him. And pagans, the same thing. He was a good pagan, but the Christians made him up to be something else. And all through history, even today with higher criticism, you have liberal German theologians saying Jesus was a liberal German theologian, right?
Right.
And as the Gospels distorted it with all this fanciful stuff about him doing miracles and stuff. So, that's again one of those, lines of witnesses that you find throughout church history.
Right. One of the last ones I want to talk about. I mean, I'd kind of be remiss if I didn't talk to you about Martin Luther being a hostile witness, especially since he started the whole Protestant Reformation.
Oh yeah.
Um, I guess for those listening who maybe aren't Catholic, how does him being a hostile witness prove in a way the Catholic faith or yeah, Catholic faith?
Yeah, sure. It's all these unwitting things that you can't deny because it's like the giant elephant in the room. So in my book, Islam kind of it shows, that it affirms certain Christian beliefs. Why, we don't know. I have crusaders. I have people from the Inquisition dispelling Inquisition's myths. Certain aspects of Catholicism throughout history. So Luther, there's a few things that he's a hostile witness on. For example, as you know, William, the Old Testament canon, right? That's something that interests both of us. When he dismissed the Deuterocanon in a debate in Leipzig, Germany, on July 8th, actually July 8th is coming up, 1519. He says this. Let me read the quote. Now, the debates on purgatory, Johann Eck, the Catholic theologian, cites a number of texts to prove purgatory, the full Catholic understanding of purgatory. And Luther responds, there's no proof of purgatory in any portion of sacred scripture which can be entered into debate and serve as proof. For the book of Maccabees, not being in the canon, is of weight with the faithful, but it avails nothing against the obstinate. And that's very interesting because, in my other books, like Why Catholic Bibles Are Bigger from Catholic Answers Press, I showed that Martin Luther actually used the deuterocanonical books as proofs in debates prior to this disputation against Catholics. Now, this is after the 95 Theses, after he jumped ship, right? And he's still quoting them as scripture or even canonical scripture up till this debate. And then now he does a backflip and he says, you can't enter these things in debate. And he eventually appeals to Jerome for that. But the last part of what he says is very interesting. It is of weight with the faithful, but it avails nothing against the obstinate. So he admits, and he can't deny this, that the Deuterocanon and the books of Maccabees does have doctrinal weight, something Protestants deny today. But the thing is, he said it didn't have enough weight to overturn his convictions. So, which comes up with this whole idea Luther has that a book is canonical up to the extent that he hears Christ preached in it. And so there's different levels of canonicity. And it just so happened that this book of Maccabees, 2 Maccabees 12:46 to be exact, to him wasn't enough weight to overturn his convictions. So you have that. That's one witness. Anything you want to explore in that, or?
Well, right, like you said, didn't they have to submit books that they thought were scripture before these debates?
Oh yeah. The format in medieval debate would be you would give a protestio at the beginning of the debate and basically say, okay, here's what I believe to be my sources for authority, and then based on that, then you'd make your arguments. So in the protestio, actually, I think I came up with 3 or 4 instances. I can't remember now. Where in the protestio, he says, I'm only going to follow scripture. And one of them specifically says, I'll follow only the canonical scripture. But then in his debates, he'll quote Sirach, he'll quote Tobit, he'll quote the deuterocanonical books. Mm-hmm. So clearly he understood them as inspired scripture capable of used in debate as proofs up until he gets cornered by Eck. And I love pointing out, we were talking before the show about William Albrecht, our good friend,
right,
who's fluent in German, and he confirmed this. Eck's name in German means corner. And so Eck lived up to his name. He cornered Luther. And Luther, that's when he pulled the parachute and said, Maccabees can't be entered.
Right. So he kind of flipped the script. Yeah, it's scripture up until I can't answer your question.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of how, if you follow Luther closely, that's how he comes up with a lot of his teachings. He's kind of backed into them. It's pretty rare you have something where he puts something forward. It's usually only when something is, pushed against him, he'll deny it, like transubstantiation, for example. Once Catholics insisted on transubstantiation, that's when he said, well, I'll flip to consubstantiation just to spite the papist. It kind of backs into it. And so this is kind of par for the course for Luther.
Right. Interesting. And like I said, guys, Gary goes from scripture all the way to modern times, Hitler, talking about all these different witnesses. So it's a great book. Check it out. Gary, do you have anything coming up? What's
Yeah.
going on in your life, I guess, with everything going on?
Well, besides the show, and by the way, yeah, we got to get you on the show again. Um, I kind of smiled because I didn't realize July 8th, 1519 is the date where Luther denied Maccabees. And I'm actually going to have a back-to-back debate with a Protestant on the Old Testament canon on July 7th and 8th.
Oh,
So
wow. Happy
I
anniversary.
wanted to, yeah, it's 1 year short. We should have done this last year, but his book didn't come out. So I'm going to be debating a Baptist, Steve Christie. He wrote a book, Why Protestant Bibles Are Smaller. And so he's the first debate on the 7th is going to be for the Protestant Old Testament canon. And the 8th, I'm going to do the case for the Deuterocanon. So that'll be on a website called Reason and Theology, which is another great group.
Absolutely.
We're kind of making a posse of, you, me, William, these guys. We should all like gang up and have a federation of Catholic apologists or something. But yeah,
you
Reason
can be
and
the
Theology.
champion. You're already the sensei in the dojo. So,
Yeah, I'll be the court jester. I'll be the comic relief. How about that?
so just a question based on the title of that book, is it an answer to your book?
Not entirely. He actually
Okay.
takes aim a lot at Trent Horn, Jimmy Aiken.
Okay.
He tries to use Catholic sources, but he does use some of my books,
Okay.
and yeah. So it'll be an interesting debate to say the least. So please keep me in your prayers.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. And that's going to be on reasonandtheology.com
Yep.
on their
Yep.
YouTube channel and all the good
Yep.
stuff.
YouTube is going to be streamed live and eventually recorded and put up there.
Okay. Go subscribe to that channel. And then how about your YouTube channel?
Yeah, Hands-On Apologetics. That has all our shows up there, so you get to see me make a fool of myself on a daily basis, at least weekdays. Then I really make a fool of myself. And we have great guests like yours
Absolutely.
truly, William Hemsworth and all sorts of people. And it's the whole show's dedicated to just building up knowledge and skills to defend the faith. So we learn informal fallacies every show. We learn early church father. And then we have great guests like you, William, come on and kind of, upload some great information that we can use.
Well, Gary, thank you for coming on the program to talk about your book. Guys, check it out. You'll love it. A lot of great information, give you a lot of great insight. And Gary, what I know, and you have Hands-On Apologetics. Any other places we could find you?
Well, yeah, two websites, handsonapologetics.com and GaryMichuta.com.
Great. Gary, thanks again for coming on. And everyone keep Gary in your prayers for that awesome debate that's coming up, and check it out on reasonandtheology.com and subscribe to their YouTube channel as well. They have great stuff every week.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah, they're good. Just like you. I mean, you're putting out some great stuff too. As I'm inviting guests on my show, they're saying, "Hey, I'm going to be on Hemsworth's show." It's like that's awesome.
yeah, we're going to have our friend Ken Litchfield on at the end of this month. So I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
talking with Ken.
yeah, that's great.
All right, Gary, thank you very much for coming on, and God bless you.
And God bless you too. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you.